Pandora's box is about to open wide.
Welcome to Pandora's Box. Thanks for chilling with us again today. We've got another special guest on the show this week, Mr. Tony Wilson. Thanks for coming on, Tony.
Hello. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Tony. For people that don't know, Tony is a British producer, sound engineer and artist manager. He was the engineer, live events and radio programme producer at BBC Radio 1 from 1963 to 1995. Is that right?
I was at the BBC for that 63 to 95, yeah. Just briefly, BBC, I was a sound engineer until 1970, and then Radio 1 producer for the rest of the time.
Nice. And you've obviously been the director of Total Rock Radio since its inception, sort of back in the year 2000.
Yeah, there was, a handful of us that got together to set it up, and
you and Tommy Vance, is that
long
right?
Long story. Yeah, amongst others, me and Tommy, and Boyd Steamson, who's still my business partner. He became our CEO when we set it up.
Yeah, nice. And that's obviously how I know Tony. So Tony very kindly lets me play out my heavy sort of rock and metal show, The Dark Dale, on Total Rock Radio, and it's obviously like an honour for me to be on Total Rock. It's one of the sort of the biggest and most well known sort of rock stations in the UK, and one of the longest running ones as well, isn't it, Tony? Like a pure rock station.
Well, yeah, I mean it's been going since the year 2000. We actually started a couple of years before that with something called Rock Radio Network, which was broadcast on some of the old World Service shortwave transmitters around the world, and also, we're talking about 1997, 98 time. We did do a sort of early version, a very basic version of streaming as well, which was just done out of a front room in Finchley in North London.
Nice. Awesome. I was going to say, Tony, if it's okay with you, can we sort of like go right back to the beginning? Please. And in sort of like a this is your lifestyle. This is what I like to do with sort of all the guests we have on the show, because I think it's always interesting for me, and I think it's very interesting for the people listening, and also it's easy to sort of keep track then, isn't it, and for us to sort of like get a good flow with the conversation. Are you happy to sort of like go right back to your childhood and sort of like just tell us your life story? So like, like where were you born? And
goodness, born just before the end of the Second World War, in South Devon, a little village just outside Torquay called Cockington, and nothing particularly remarkable, except that when I was about 6 months old, the German bombers used to fly over the coast and empty their remaining bombs on the
remaining bombs, so their planes would be lighter, so they'd get home easier. That's
right. And one dropped about half a mile down the lane from where we were, and of course it was pitch black and all that sort of thing, and my mum was just carrying me downstairs when this happened, and she dropped me on my head on the wooden stairs. Which may
that's when your love of metal started.
Which may explain a great deal, indeed. But apart from that, then we moved back to London when I was about 3.5.
So did you move back to London literally when you were a baby?
Well, 3.5. 3.5.
Oh, okay.
So
I was going to say, I didn't know that you were from the southwest, because obviously we broadcast from Somerset, but you don't have a West Country accent really at all, Tony. So.
No, well, I
guess you were too young.
I was I was tiny, but no, my parents, my family sort of basically came from London. The whole family was evacuated to Torquay, and a lot of my mother's side of the family remained in Cockington, after the war, and I used to spend, half my time, holidays and stuff down there. So I right until mid-teens, really. I had a lot of connections with that part of the world.
Do you still have family there now?
No.
No.
But, I wasn't ethnically a Devonian.
Yeah, sure.
just born there.
All right. Well, I mean, it makes sense now you mentioned it. Obviously, like a lot of families did go over to places like the West Country during the war. Obviously, it was safer. I remember my grandmother telling me that literally she had to sleep out on the landing because they had lots of London kids coming to where she lived. She lived in a little village called Stegursey in Somerset, and her parents let the children have her and her sister Joan's room, so they would have to sleep out on like camping beds on the landing, like it was a common thing, obviously, at the time.
Yeah. Well, I think in this case, my dad worked for the the Prudential Assurance Company, and that, I think they just moved their head office down there. Everyone went. So it was that kind of thing. He was also in the RAF.
How old were you? How old were you when the war finished?
About 9 months old.
Oh, okay. So you can't really remember it yourself.
No.
No. Okay. Did you say your father was in the RAF?
Yeah. He didn't fly. He was.
Did he have any cool stories?
No, not really. No, as I say, he wasn't a flyer. He was connected more with radar.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I think it's quite a revolutionary thing at the time. I know that radar was invented by the British, wasn't it, during World War II? Mm-hmm. So that would have been like a ridiculously revolutionary thing for your father to be working on at the time.
Mm. And to be honest, I don't know very much about it.
So,
he didn't talk much about the war.
I remember reading that. Oh, really? Do you think that was there a reason for that? Do you think, or?
I'm not sure. It just wasn't. I mean, in a way, we never talked a lot about anything. So, whether that was because of my
very sort of old-fashioned British family
nature or his, I'm not sure.
Yeah, sure. So, what are your sort of earliest memories of growing up in London, Tony? Like, where did you go to school and stuff like that?
Okay, well, I went to school in Finchley, and then I ended up going to a private prep school. I'm not really quite sure why, how it came about. But anyway, I ended up going to a private prep school, which was only about a bus ride away from home. So, and although I did stay there as a boarder after the first few terms, which was great. I liked being kind of away from home, and in fact I enjoyed my school time. I went. This was in Mill Hill, which is just northwest London, and I went on to the sort of the secondary, the public school, and spent all my sort of school days up there, which, as I say, I kind of enjoyed a lot. School was very sporty, and I was never very interested in sport, but I took up photography and developed an interest in audio and electronics and recording and stuff like that.
While you were still in secondary school?
Yeah. So I mean, a friend of mine's father worked at the BBC in the outside broadcast department, and once or twice a year, I was able to sort of borrow bits of BBC equipment, and I would sort of record school concerts and that sort of thing, and then edit them, and actually, a couple of times we pressed them, made records from it, and all that sort of thing. So I was kind of, into that very much.
So you just so it sounds like that was like always almost just been in your blood. You just naturally developed those skills. So you just sort of like essentially taught yourself this while you were in school.
Yeah. So
that's like building the foundation for your entire career, really.
It was, actually. I mean, well, and I thought I wasn't going to. Well, this is a long story. I didn't particularly want to go to university,
Go ahead, Tony.
and I wouldn't have got to university anyway, because in the end, I didn't end up with much in the way of A-level results. Partly having been excluded from one class.
Why was that?
For having a row with the teacher.
Were you quite a naughty kid then, Tony? Were you quite a bit of a rebel in school?
It seems like it. I don't know. I didn't. I did get sort of chucked out once or twice, but I'd sort of kind of thought that I'd go into the music into a I'd find a recording studio or something to go to when I left school.
Mm-hmm. So you already knew in your mind that that's what you wanted to do. You wanted to record music. That was like clear even when you were like 16 years old.
Absolutely, yeah. And I liked music. I mean, I used to sing in the choir, and I know this is a different sort of music, but I kind of enjoyed.
Yeah, it's all music, though, isn't it?
I enjoyed taking part. So just before I was due to take what A-levels I was taking, I was a member of the school science society, and a bloke from the BBC came to give a talk. Well, a kind of recruiting talk, really, but anyway. And he talked about sound engineering at the BBC, and I thought, well, that sounds like the sort of thing I want to do. And I had a word with him at the end, and he said, well, actually, an intake sort of period has just closed, but I'll send you an application form. If you fill it in and get it back to me quickly, I'll get it in. Anyway, so that happened, and I got called for an interview, and then I got called for another interview, and they offered me a job, and all this was just before I took my A-levels.
Fantastic. So you were still 16 years old? Were you like 16, 17?
A-levels, so no, 18.
Okay, 18, right, yeah.
So basically, I had the offer of a job, before I'd taken my exams, and so
were you really happy about that? I can imagine.
Absolutely. I was delighted. I was the youngest person that they'd ever taken on as a trainee studio manager, but also the first ever not to have previously been to university. So all the people on my sort of intake were a couple of years older than me, because they'd all come through uni.
And what do you think that was down to, Tony? Was that purely because you just had such a natural skill with your sound engineering and everything you're producing? Do you think that's what it was? I mean, there was obviously some reason why they took you on at such a young age without the qualifications that everyone else had.
Probably they were changing their policy and deciding not to insist on university level. But anyway, it just happened that I was the first. So So that was that.
What sort of music were you listening to around that time, Tony?
Well, Stones, Beatles.
Because by this point, this would have been what, like this would have been what, like the.
This was 60. This was
60s,
63. This was 63. So, just the Stones and the Beatles had broken, as it were. First gig I ever went to was actually Ray Charles at the Victoria Palace.
Okay.
In London. But
what your memories of that gig? Do you remember being like really, really enjoying it?
I do. I don't remember a huge amount about it, but that anyway. That was the first proper gig I ever went to. I did actually. I did for one night only. Sing in a school band. We played a couple of the early Beatles rockers, some sort of school gig in 62, 63.
Why did it turn out being for one night only?
Because it was appalling. It was awful. Well, yeah, probably partly because of the lack of any sort of monitoring, or obviously everything was very primitive in those days in terms of stage performance. So not being able to hear what you're doing is not very helpful.
Sure.
Anyway,
sure.
So that was that. So I got into the BBC. Started at the BBC. Sort of trained as a studio manager for a few weeks, and then started, working on shows. Not.
What sort of shows did you work on?
Not at all music at this sort of stage, where you sort of start off on very simple, little sort of news recordings or whatever, and work up to sort of doing the odd sort of live thing. You also had to do 6 months, I think, at Bush House, the BBC World Service, where you really were thrown in at the deep end, with a sort of constant schedule of often just little 15-minute live broadcasts. It was a rabbit warren of a place, studios all over the place, and you were constantly running around from one to the next, with hardly any breathing space. Anyway, the other thing, we did quite a lot of comedy, and sort of little, very often in those days actually, still sort of little wartime dramas and things. You had to provide sound effects and all that sort of thing. So there was a lot of varied kind of broadcasting, news, current affairs, little bits of simple music. Anyway, so after about a couple of years, I got the opportunity to join the music engineering sort of department, and
were you really happy about that, I imagine?
That's when things, absolutely. So it wasn't all rock and roll by any means. In fact, it kind of.
Oh, of course.
This was just before Radio 1 started, so it was still the right programme, and there was a lot of little sort of trios and quartets, either jazz, which was nice, but very often there was a once or twice a day sort of programme of continuous music called Music While You Work, which was a kind of hangover from the wartime, basically. But
right.
It was just not.
Can you remember, like, are there any sort of like noticeable bands you can think of that you were sort of working on at that time, or?
These weren't bands. They were just sort of, kind of pick-up groups of three or four musicians. All session musicians. But then obviously there was pop stuff going on as well, and I sort of became buddies with a guy called John Walters, who was John Peel's producer.
Okay.
And eventually John Peel's producer, not initially. He'd actually been the trumpet player in a 60s band called the Alan Price Set, which you can look up. So we started working together. I mean, and with him, he was kind of booking much more interesting stuff, not the tremolos and.
So was he working with you at the BBC?
John, yeah, he was a producer.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah.
We ended up. I was ended up sort of recording all the kind of current kind of hip bands like Zeppelin and Fleetwood Mac, the original sort of blues.
Nice.
Fleetwood Mac,
the Peter Green incarnation. Yeah.
All that sort of thing.
So did you always just naturally gravitate towards like more the heavier music of the day?
I did.
Obviously, at the time, that would have been like the heaviest stuff out there, wouldn't it?
It was, yeah. No, I was always kind of much. I mean, that sort of thing was sort of few and far between. I mean, most of the stuff we were doing, was the sort of current day pop stuff. But no, absolutely. I always I had a preference for the more extreme and the kind of out of the ordinary. So yeah.
Do you have any like? Do you ever like sort of reflect and like think why that was? Because at the time it was such a revolutionary type of music, wasn't it? Like, what do you think it is about you that made you gravitate towards that style of music?
I don't know. I found it more.
It's quite a philosophical question to ask.
I found it more interesting. I had a love of all sorts of music. Kind of jazz and classical. And I just found that sort of rock music was kind of more interesting than most of the pop stuff. So
do you find it quite like what's it like for you now? Obviously for people like myself, I don't want to make you feel like old, Tony, but I mean I hear, as a massive music fan myself, I hear about the music in the 60s and the 70s and what it was like growing up in that era with all these revolutionary bands like Zeppelin, and even like in the 60s like the Incredible String Band, and then obviously Sabbath coming out. Like, is it strange for you sitting here in 2024 thinking back to those times when you were like living during that period while like when Led Zeppelin first came out? Is that what's that like for you to sit back and reflect on now?
Well, I mean, it was great. I kind of wonder, it must be, in some ways, it must be the same for people now. In fact, not it must be. It patently is the same for people now. I mean, I go to all sorts of festivals and metal gigs, which are crammed with young people, really, getting into the music, and loving it just as much as as we did those bands back then. The thing is that somehow, because there's kind of so much else going on all the time, that I don't think these bands, kind of shine as brightly, as the earlier bands did, because they had much less competition, much less noise going on around them, So.
Yeah, I've sort of thought that myself. I find it like it seems hard for bands nowadays to get put on that level of like a Metallica or a Black Sabbath or a Led Zeppelin. It just seems like a lot harder for bands to reach that level, or at least in the rock and sort of like metal genres anyway. You see there's a lot of big sort of like pop acts and stuff like that, and I don't really know why that is. As you said, I don't know if it's just like the noise, or maybe because we know so much about bands nowadays, it takes away maybe a little bit of element of like almost like a mystery, and almost like making these. Before, I guess, when there was such limited information, it almost would have made a band seem like legendary, like almost like mythological, like had almost like a mythical element. Whereas nowadays, you can go on the internet, you can read up about everything about their private lives, every intricate thing. It takes away maybe that mystery and maybe that element of like, or as I said, almost like mythology about them. That almost wonder of them coming to your town, and then if you can go and see them, that's like your time to go and see them, and it's like almost being around almost like mythical figures, like rather than people that just play songs.
Sure. Yeah. I think there's a lot in that. The magic has been dispersed to that extent. Yeah.
What do you think about that? Like, as somebody that's lived in both sort of ages, do you think that's a shame, or?
It's life. It's just the way things are. I'm not. To me it's a shame, but people, we just live in the world as it is around us, and you kind of what you grow up in and what you grow up with is normality for you, so
sure.
I'm sure there's plenty of other good things.
Oh yeah, one thing I do think is great about just before we get back to sort of like your story, going back to when you started working on the interesting bands, one thing I do think is great about the modern day is it's sort of like swings and roundabouts, but I think on the one hand, bands can sometimes get lost in the noise maybe a bit, so it's harder for them to stand out, but also if you are, say, like a radio presenter or something like we are, Tony, like it's so easy to find great music. Like if I can spend just an hour searching through, whether it's like Spotify or YouTube or whatever, I can find so many good bands. And sometimes they'll have millions of followers and I've never heard of them before, and sometimes they'll have like 100 followers and I've never heard of them before. Do you know what I mean? And you'll find like some little gem from this little town somewhere in the UK or Europe or America, and you think, this is freaking great. Like, I can't believe that they're not more well known. But as I said, it swings around about. So for them, it must be frustrating because it's harder for them to stand out. But in terms of finding good music, it's not that hard at all, regardless of what genre you're into.
Yeah.
There's such a plethora of just amazing artists out there if you're willing to spend the time looking. Indeed.
I don't know if you.
Going back to your sort of. Sorry, go on, Tony.
I was just going to say, I don't know if you heard there was a noise popped up on my screen, but probably didn't come through to you.
Yeah, no, that's all right. But sorry, getting back to sort of like your story anyway. So sort of before we branched off, you were saying you just started working on some more interesting music, like you'd started for the BBC working on like Zeppelin and some other bands like that. So if we sort of pick up where we left off there.
Yeah, I can't really remember what shows there. I suppose it was for early John Peel. I used to do. I did at the point where. So we're talking about. I'm still a sound engineer, aren't I? And So I was working with John Walters, and this was on very, very early John Peel stuff. He used to book all sorts of the real kind of up and coming avant-garde, bands around. T-Rex, for example, almost before Bolan went electric, we were doing acoustic T-Rex stuff, and Colosseum, all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. Emerson, of course. Anyway, in 1969, another of the Radio 1 producers, Jeff Griffin, wanted to begin to do live concert series, and this sort of thing hadn't been done before. And so we did a couple of pilots, which I engineered, one with the Moody Blues and one with Zeppelin.
Fantastic. And
they were done in one of our. I mean, in those days we had in London, which is where I was working. We had loads, 10 or a dozen different music studios dotted around the city, including Maida Vale, of course, which is become pretty world famous. But anyway, we did these two live shows, and they were kind of pilots for then what started the next year in 1970 as in Radio 1 in concert series, which ran then for decades, I suppose. Just with it doesn't sound very special these days. But it was just a band playing in front of an audience, as opposed to just sort of studio sessions or whatever. But it wasn't till quite a lot.
Sounds pretty interesting though. Like I can imagine.
Well, it was.
No, sorry, I was going to say
it was early days. It was obviously it was later on. Obviously, we would then start going out and recording actual gigs. But I mean, it was a kind of studio-based or theatre-based gig.
Were you sort of mingling with Led Zeppelin and the Moody Blues when you did those live studio sessions and stuff?
Well, I mean, I knew them. Yeah.
See, even that's pretty amazing, really, isn't it?
I mean, I didn't. Actually, I was going to say I didn't know the Stones at all, and I never did anything with the Stones, although they did do the odd thing. Radio 1. I knew a friend of mine who was on the same sort of studio managers course back in the early 60s. Had been at school with Paul McCartney. Not in the same school, not in the same year, but anyway, he got in touch with Paul, and a handful of us ended up sort of going round to Paul's house a few times when just round the back of Lord's Cricket Ground in St John's Wood in London.
Wow.
And on one of these occasions, we went up. He had a sort of music room up in the attic with a little upright piano, and we went up there, and he started sort of playing away this bits of tune and stuff, and just said, it's something we're working on at the moment, which, when it was released several months, probably getting on for a year later, I realised had been A Day in the Life of Sgt. Pepper, which was the album that they were.
Wow.
So So yeah,
that's so crazy that you were like in amongst that, like you were witnessing that, like round, literally with Paul McCartney as he was sort of like, you say, playing these tunes that would end up being like iconic Beatles.
Yeah,
I mean, it's crazy. It's like those memories alone that you have, Tony, are just insane. Like to most like mere mortals, like just normal like music fans. Do you know what I mean? It's just crazy to even hear a story like that.
Another quick one. I had a friend who was a young record plugger for EMI Harvest, for the Harvest label, which was on EMI, and he liked, to smoke a bit of dope. Well, indeed, we both like to smoke a bit of dope, and occasionally we used to get together and around at his flat in Ladbroke Grove. And this one evening, we were just having a smoke, and he said, I've got this cassette here. There's something that's coming out in 6 months or so, should we have a listen to it? Anyway, we sort of sat and smoked and listened to this fucking great cassette of music, which turned out to be Dark Side of the Moon. Oh
wow!
Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, which became, the biggest selling album in the world for decades. Rock album.
It's crazy.
So
great thing to listen to, obviously, of course, when you're stoned.
Indeed. Yeah. So where were we? I digress.
So you were saying, obviously, you were doing these live sessions, going around different gigs and stuff. Were you working the desk on these?
Yeah. So this was all me as a sound engineer, and then in 1970, I applied and got a position as a producer at Radio 1.
Why did you apply for that? Was it just considered a better job, or had you had enough of sound engineering, or?
Well, it didn't involve having enough of sound engineering. I mean, I hadn't. I was kind of nudged into it. I mean, it was better money, but it didn't mean. What it meant was that I was producing sessions, as opposed to engineering them. But I mean, the engineers that I worked with, and there were, I tended to work with, wherever possible, with a sort of quite a small kind of group of engineers. And we were able to, we worked together in a very sort of collaborative way. So I was kind of still using my, kind of engineering skills, along with kind of production as well. So
just to give you a bit more like freedom and a bit more control over what was going on.
A lot.
Yeah.
So that was great. So that sort of carried on through the 70s. All sorts of wonderful sessions. People like Thin Lizzy and God knows.
One of my favourite bands.
Roxy Music. King Crimson.
I think a lot of people didn't realise. Sorry, just to talk about Thin Lizzy for a second. I think a lot of people that have only heard like their big hits, like Boys Are Back in Town. Obviously, Whiskey in the Jar is a big one, but I think people didn't realise how almost like revolutionary and how heavy some of like the lesser known tracks are. Some of the, I think songs like Thunder and Lightning and Cold Sweat and stuff like that. I just freaking just melt my face when I listen to them to this day. It's almost like if you want to get in the car and just like turn up the volume and listen to some like great old school hard rock tracks, and in terms of like the guitaring and everything, it's just like Thin Lizzy, one of my favourite bands.
Did you like...
sorry, going back to your story anyway.
Did you like Gary Moore, Lizzy? Or...
Yeah. Well, I like all Lizzy really, but
yeah. Obviously,
Gary Moore, a lot of the insane guitaring stuff.
Yeah. I've got a very sort of sad, or rather embarrassingly sad, Lizzy story, which is that
right.
Phil used to, from time to time, produce a little booklet, hardbacked booklet, of his lyrics, like a little poetry book, hardback with his song lyrics in it, and he gave me. Each time he did. I had two of them anyway, and to my, utter shame, I'm afraid I've lost them somewhere along the line in my life.
Right.
They've escaped from me. Which is.
Do you think there's a chance you might find it somewhere in an old box or something like that, or is it?
I don't.
Is it one of those things that you've really tried to find?
Yeah. I don't know. In some.
So that'd almost be priceless,
some divorce or house move, they've got.
Yeah. Sure.
Oh
yeah, what a shame.
Got away from me, which is a huge shame. It was wonderful.
So did you know Phil quite well then? If he gave you these booklets, or if you ended up having them, did you know him quite well?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think they're one of those bands. In my opinion, they don't get enough. They don't get the credit they deserve. I think one thing that speaks volumes about them. I mean, I know that you were as well, Tony. I was like Download last year, and I mean, like James Hetfield. I mean, Metallica are probably the biggest metal band on the planet right now. I think most people would probably agree on. Overall, but I remember before they played Whiskey in the Jar, James said, this is dedicated to Phil Lynott, like the best front man of all time. So I think even though maybe a lot of younger like rock and metal fans maybe don't appreciate Thin Lizzy for what they are, I think it speaks volumes that people like James Hetfield, and I know there's many people, metalers from that genre, I guess like early 80s that were very much listening to Thin Lizzy when they would have been like in their early teens and stuff like that. They really appreciate Thin Lizzy as like these revolutionary, like almost like mythical figures in that world.
Yeah. Anyway, so moving along, I was producing, amongst other things. I mean, I continued, incidentally, I continued my association with John Walters and John Peel as a producer. I then sort of became, produced loads and loads of the Peel sessions. It's difficult to say what proportion of Peel sessions I was involved in, but a lot anyway. But I was also working with Alan Freeman on an afternoon tea time show on Radio 1, and we more at his instigation than mine, to be honest, we started kind of slipping in the more than occasional rock track into kind of afternoon show, because it was things like Argent and stuff like that, and Derek Chinnery, who was the head of the station, didn't like it, wasn't very keen on it, and ended up saying, well, if you want to play all this rock music, I'll give you your own show on Saturday afternoons. And obviously, I never really spoke to Alan about it. But I mean, it would have meant quite a big reduction in, in fees for him, but for having 5 weekday shows just to one 3-hour Saturday afternoon. Anyway, he was overjoyed to do that. So 1973 in July, sometime like that, middle of 1973, we started the first rock show on Radio 1, which was a 3-hour show every Saturday afternoon.
So was that the first rock rock radio show in the UK? Like dedicated rock radio show in the UK, do you think?
More or less, I would say. I'd
see, that in itself is amazing, isn't it? Really.
I can't say it definitely was, but I don't know of any others. Although, fairly soon the ILRs sort of started started having rock shows. If they hadn't already, but I wasn't aware of any. It's just that it was just something we wanted to do, and
of course,
and that was fantastic. That kind of started the ball rolling and ran for 5 years, until sorry, I'm waving my hand in front of the camera.
That's all right.
That ran for 5 years.
You do what you like, Tony.
Until Alan sort of decided, or it was decided for him, that I think actually Derek Chinnery, who was still the head of the network at that time, just wanted to make a change, and I don't know, he felt that Fluff was too old, or something like that. Anyway, so it was decided.
Fluff, what's Fluff?
Fluff was
that the name of the show?
Alan Freeman's nickname, and the name that Alan Freeman was known by, by everyone actually, but I mean publicly and privately. Fluff Freeman. So
they cancelled his show.
So the show came to an end. Yeah, and I took a few weeks off, and came back and said, right, we need another rock show. And so Derek said, well, all right, we'll see who you can find. And I had a look round, auditioned, 1 or 2 people, and including Tommy Vance. Now Tommy had been on Radio 1 right he'd been there were a number of DJs that were on Radio 1 in its early days, who for one reason or another didn't stay. I mean, actually, John Peel. There were 3. Tommy and Pete Drummond and John Peel were kind of competing for a slot, and Peel obviously got it. Anyway, and Tommy had sort of drifted off and done a lot of other work. I mean, he always did a lot of commercial voiceover work, and he was quite busy on British Forces broadcasting and World Service and other things. But at this time in '78, he was on Capital Radio doing a rock show. Anyway, So, you know, I got together with Tommy and you know, I decided that he was definitely the one to do it for Radio 1. And so I went, I said to Chinnery, you know, okay, I want Tommy Vance to have a go at this. And his eyes rolled to the ceiling and he said, not that has been. You know, as you know, someone who'd been on Radio 1 and sort of, you know,
sure,
kind of, you know.
So was it like a strange idea to him at the time, like to almost like have somebody that went away to then bring him back again?
It was.
Was that like a bit of an alien?
It was exactly
idea.
It was a very alien idea, and not, you know, sort of, well, on your own head be it, you know, go and off you go, then, you know, give it a go. Anyway, so that was how 15 years or more of the Friday Rock Show started.
So you managed to convince him to bring Tommy Vance back?
Yeah. He's just, you know.
Awesome.
He said, you know, on your own head be it, sort of thing.
Yeah. Brilliant. So what are your sort of like memories of that time, like doing those shows?
Oh, fantastic. Well, I mean, and you know, for me, it was kind of a continuation of what I'd been doing with Alan Freeman for the previous 5 years.
Yeah.
But, you know, obviously different person, different personality, and you know, and a new show with you know, new ideas and things. No, we worked, you know, we just...
In what way do you reckon the show changed, even though they were like both rock shows? In what way do you reckon the show changed with Tommy Vance as the head?
You know, they had different personalities.
Sure.
So, I mean, we still used one of the things that had started with Alan Freeman. This was him, not me, really. He also had a love of opera and classical music and stuff, and he well, I mean, I kind of did the editing and did the work, but he was always wanting to use like little snippets, you know, 5-second little tags of classical music to punctuate the rock music that we were playing on the show. So,
nice.
You know, little classical stabs and jingles and things instead of, you know, rock ones.
Okay. Quite an interesting idea.
It's not that we did that with Tommy. We didn't do that with Tommy, but you know, we sort of continued. We used a lot of not particularly rock, sort of like talk over beds and stuff like that. That you know, for whatever he was talking. We definitely did. You know, it wasn't just, you know, him talking and playing music, you know, playing tracks and stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, we had different features and competitions and things, and you know, we'd had good audience reaction. I mean, in those days, audience reaction came in the form of you know, you gauged it in the size or number of post bags you got, postal sacks full of full of postcards and letters.
Sure.
And they were, you know, sacks full of cards and letters every week.
Brilliant.
So, you know, I mean, we could tell that there was a lot of people out there, you know, very into what we were doing,
interacting with your show and just listening to your show,
interacting, you know, taking part, but also very grateful and you know, enthusiastic about it, which was wonderful. You know, it was a great feeling, you know, to to have such a sort of strong response.
And over this time, I imagine, considering you started Total Rock with him and everything, you and Tommy became like close friends, I imagine.
We did. Yeah, I mean, he was best man at my second wedding. No, we were, very close.
And how long did the show go on for?
Well, it's cast, but in a way, I suppose it's still going on. But no, I mean, Friday Rock Show started in '78. Tommy left in about 91 or 2 to go to when Virgin started.
Okay.
And God, I can't think of her name.
You're trying to think of the replacement for Tommy's show? Or?
I am. And anyway, it doesn't matter. So then I did it with this lady whose name I absolutely cannot.
It's all right.
I'm not going to remember.
Happens to us all. Happens to us all, Tony.
Until I left. I left in 1995. At which point the BBC, in its wisdom, moved the show to Scotland.
Okay. What was the idea behind that?
Probably to kill it off, but
right.
Well, no, it wasn't. It wasn't to kill it off. It was, it would have been, a BBC attempt at, not being metropolitan. Kind of spreading.
Right. Okay.
Work and and
spreading stuff around,
creativity around, which in theory sounds great, but the thing is, with a show like that, without wishing to be metropolitanist, the huge majority of what's happening is happening in London. It's not happening.
Sure.
It's not happening in Glasgow.
No.
You're not where everything's happening, where you need to be.
It doesn't really make sense.
And so he spent a lot of his week on the train down to London. Anyway, after a year, I think they axed it. So that was that.
Oh, really?
And then a year or two later, it was brought. Who does the rock show now?
I'm not sure, to be honest, Tony. I don't know.
It's terribly embarrassing because I know him really well. It's just that when you get to my age, I've always it's not really an age thing, to be honest. I've always been terrible with people's names all my life.
I'm not great myself. Yeah.
Daniel P. Carter.
Daniel P. Carter.
Daniel P. Carter.
Daniel P. Carter,
right.
And he's done it ever since. The Radio 1 rock show.
Right.
I mean, they didn't. It wasn't long before they revived it, and he's done it ever since.
Right. Okay. So, sort of coming up to like 95. Why did you leave the BBC?
I was made redundant for being too old and too expensive.
Too old and too expensive.
Both of which are true. Well, no, I mean, whether I was too old is a no. They were. Trevor Dan and Matthew Bannister were brought in to reshape Radio 1, basically, and make it cheaper, but also to get rid of a lot of the old guard, the sort of Dave Lee Travises and Steve Wrights
What was the reasoning behind that? Did they think they had too much almost like a monopoly over it? Or?
No, just to orient the station towards a younger audience.
Okay.
I think they felt that that Radio 1, which at this point was 25 years old. So roughly, anyway, was not appealing to the kind of youth market sufficiently.
Right. Right.
So and also, people like me that had been there for a very long time were on, fairly decent salaries, and they wanted to be able to employ younger, cheaper people. And so
that would just be happy to get the job, almost like you were 30 years before.
Indeed. Fair enough. And although, a lot of, quite a few people left around those, in that time period.
Yeah.
And quite a lot of them, just, apply, return to the BBC in some other form.
Capacity.
Some other capacity. But I never did. I just, to be honest, I had the most wonderful time there.
Yeah.
So you
don't have any bad memories of the place?
30 years, kind of, pretty much.
Yeah.
But I never really liked.
Did it leave a bad taste in your mouth?
I didn't like the organisation. I was,
Right.
I kind of, felt I was there. I was able to spend the BBC's money, to kind of, feed the rock and roll.
Sure.
Feed the rock and roll habit, and I wasn't, I didn't feel particularly inclined to want to kind of, go back, and so I just left. I just started doing a few independent, bits and pieces, and then.
Sorry, Tony. So when you said that you didn't like the organisation, do you mean the BBC as a whole? Like you weren't really like a fan of the way it ran from the inside?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was like that you wanted to do your thing. You wanted to do rock shows and be involved in that scene, but you felt that there was like pushback against that, and that the higher up executives
actually there wasn't exactly
didn't appreciate it.
There wasn't pushback. There was more.
Right.
The entire time, really, that I was, from starting the Alan Freeman rock show in 1973 till the end of time, I don't think anyone ever questioned or criticised anything to do with any editorial policy, and that's because there was no one there who really either knew or cared what it was I was doing.
Sure.
They understood that it was probably quite good to have someone like me doing what I did, but they didn't really want to get involved in it. So from that point of view, it was fantastic, because I just had a free hand. I didn't answer. I did technically answer to people, but nobody ever questioned what I did. So
sounded like a pretty good life, really, to be honest. Like at the time,
absolutely, it was. It was fantastic. But there are just other aspects of the BBC that I just didn't really get on with.
Fair enough.
No, the Radio 1.
Do you want to elaborate on them, or is it just something you'd rather just keep to yourself?
Not really.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah.
I think it's a bit of a dysfunctional organisation. But on the other hand, pockets of it do great. Pockets of it do great things, and that's and it. I mean, both in television and radio. I think the general consensus is it's sort of like a shadow of its former self, like how it was in the 60s and 70s. Do you agree with that? It's too far away for me to comment now, to be honest. I mean,
sure.
How long is it? 30 years since I left, really.
Well, been since you worked there, yeah, 30 years. It'll be 29 years now, won't it? Yeah. Fair play. So what did you do then? As you said, you started tinkering around with different projects and stuff when you left the BBC.
Yeah, that's right. And but then after kind of a couple of years or maybe a bit more, then this small group of us got together, to start a rock station. Which, as I say, we did start from the front room of a flat in Finchley in 1997, probably the middle of 97 or 1998, called Rock Radio Network, and that was with Tommy, but actually Andy Wax.
So what were you being broadcast?
Sorry,
right.
I was just trying to think if there was, apart from me,
no, that's all right.
Papa G, who is back on the station as of a year or more ago. He was on Rock Radio Network back in the pre-Total Rock days. I'm not sure what anyone else.
And where were you being broadcast at the time, Tony? Because the internet was such like a new thing at the time.
It was newish. I mean, I was always very techie. I was always very into kind of internet technology. So we did. So
you were always up to date with the latest tech.
We did. Yeah, I mean, I kind of was part of the design for a whole design team for a computer system, the first computer system that kind of ran Radio 1 back in the 80s. No, I always had
involved in before you left BBC.
That's the thing. I got my first computer in the around about 1980 when BBC Micro or whatever the very first little home computers came out, and I immediately developed an interest in programming, in coding computers. I sort of at that point, because I don't know if you have any kind of programming experience, but programming a computer is just a continual kind of refining process to start to make it do what you want, and then to make it do it kind of better, more elegantly. You constantly kind of refining what you've done to make it the best. And I sort of understood at that point that that I needn't ever be bored for the rest of my life, because there's always a challenge. And I still do. I mean, I write a lot of the code that runs Total Rock, and it's just one of those things, and and HTML sort of web coding and all that sort of thing as well. So that's something else that I do. So when we started Rock Radio Network, it was we did stream it from there. But
did you have any like marketing issues like early on? Because I can imagine like in those days it would have. I mean, were there like barely? I can imagine any other stations that would have even been broadcasting on the internet and stuff like that. Like, did you have a struggle in that regard?
Marketing.
Yeah, like getting the station up there, just getting listeners.
Yeah, well, as far as the internet was concerned, yeah. I mean, I don't know where our listeners came from. I mean, I guess we got written up a bit in the music press, but we, as I said earlier, we also managed to sort of piggyback onto this network of old BBC World Service shortwave transmitters, which popped up around the world at different times of the day, and so we were able to get on that a bit. I mean, it's all completely random. I've no idea who was listening or if anyone was listening or not, but they were. And a chap who runs country music radio in the UK, name escapes me again, but he had a channel on Sky Analog. This was before Sky Digital. They had an analog satellite.
I remember that. Yeah, they had about like 200 channels, I think.
And he had a channel, and he let us have a couple of hours a week on his Sky channel as well. And we used to.
Fantastic!
We used to broadcast. We used to record a show on VHS and then run it down to the West End, and they
Brilliant.
put it out. So anyway,
what did the video look like? Was it like what did that video
it
look
was
like?
Audio.
When it was playing out?
It was on a VHS tape, but it was all just audio.
It was just audio. So it was like a radio show.
So this was
it was
at
playing
Sky
on telly,
analog radio stations, not the TV. Yeah, that's all right. I'm with you. No, it was audio only. But anyway, so this. Really, to answer your question, it was costing us money. We couldn't make any money out of it, or make it pay for itself. Rock Radio Network. So we folded it up and decided to set around finding some money, getting some investment to start afresh, which we did. And hence Total Rock was born.
Brilliant. So you managed to find some people who were willing to fund. You found some good investors.
We found one investor, a gentleman called Guy Hands. And if your brain cells are working, you might recall that he was one of the things he did was that he ended up buying and owning for a short period EMI Records.
Okay. Yeah. Obviously, a massive record company.
Yes. Unfortunately, EMI was already in trouble, and I think by the time Guy let go of it, it was even in more trouble. But
right.
So he was our initial investor. Probably need to be a bit careful what I say here, but we parted company with Guy.
Right.
After a while, and essentially Total Rock went into liquidation. We had to close the company. And we had, during the period where this was all going on, we'd got to know an American who was very into kind of rock and roll, kind of loved the music business, but that's not the business he was in at all. He had been a NASA scientist and had been involved in
bit random
in the development of the fuel system for the shuttle.
Wow, an interesting guy.
A very interesting guy, and he'd got out of NASA and come over here and set up hedge fund business.
Okay.
And he, as I say, he had kind of loved rock, and so he decided to buy the company out of liquidation and put us back, us directors, as it were, back in charge of it. I mean, we can, as you know, when you've gone into liquidation, you can't be the director of that company again. You can't reset it up straight away. So
right.
Anyway, so he bought it and put us back as the sort of management, and we carried on with Henry. His name was Henry Green, by the way.
Right.
And we carried on with him, building things up, and we were just going back onto Sky Digital. See, when in the early days of Total Rock, we did fantastically. We were, we were a kind of front runner before all this problem and the liquidation. We were bigger than Planet Rock.
Sure.
But we just lost an awful lot of time and steam with the sort of running down of the company. Anyway, so we were just going back onto Sky Digital under Henry Green, and he was suddenly taken into hospital and died. At about 48 hours notice of an undiagnosed cancer.
Crazy when you hear stories like that somebody could just like die last minute like that and not even know they had cancer,
Yeah.
So I guess that really turned things on its head for you.
So that turned things on its head again, and Henry's wife, Catherine, who was a lovely lady, no doubt still is, but didn't really have any interest in having a rock radio station. Sure. She eventually decided to liquidate the company for the second time, and and so I and my other remaining, at this stage, business partner, Boyd Stevenson, who'd been with us from the start of Total Rock, he and I acquired the company and relaunched it in its third
incarnation.
Third incarnation. Thank you, Calum. Which is where we are today. But obviously, by that time, the sort of rock radio market in the UK was pretty well established, and it was not really going to be possible for us to find any sort of serious investment to sort of try and get back into the game, and as far as being terrestrial was concerned.
Sure.
But we've just carried on doing what we do, kind of looking ways of sort of growing growing what we do, but
growing sort of organically.
But that kind of brings us.
I guess the good thing about like the modern age is there are so many. Like it's very normal just to have like internet radio stations nowadays. You know, I mean, let's face it, it's completely free to have your radio station on the internet, and it's becoming like a, you know, I mean, people use the internet for everything, so it's much more of a normal thing, and surely a hell of a lot more cost effective.
Absolutely. With the probable exception that because of what you've just said, because it's so easy and because there are tens of thousands of people doing it, none of those people has a very big audience.
Sure.
Because the audience is, you know, which the audience, which might be massive for a small number of people, is you know, because there are so many thousands of stations and things, you know, it's not. And the other thing,
I guess there's a bit. Yeah.
No, go on. You say.
No, all I was going to say is I guess it's a little bit like earlier on we were saying about artists even, do you know what I mean? It's just like back in the 60s and 70s and 80s even, do you know what I mean? There would have been like less artists, it would have been easier to stood out. The same almost with radio stations, whereas nowadays I guess there's almost just so many. The hard thing is like sticking out of the pack, isn't it?
Yeah. It is. And it's compounded by the fact that you know, increasingly generations a lot younger than mine and possibly younger than yours, you know, are no longer really kind of tuned in to listen, you know, to consuming linear radio, you know.
Just the radio style, the radio format, because everything's on demand. Like you just want to like listen to whatever you want to listen to, rather than stick something on and almost let that programming guide you or whatever, or dictate what's being played.
Which I find interesting. That, you know, there are still a kind of, you know, there are radio colleges or radio courses. And there are young people coming out of those courses, you know, looking for careers in radio, and I kind of wonder to myself, are you, you know, are you,
is that the right thing to be doing?
Is there a future in this?
Well, I guess it's like that song, isn't it? Video killed the radio star.
You know, and you know, in terms of Total Rock, you know, I'm very conscious of the fact that basically, you know, no one under 25 interacts with anything that we do. You know,
do you think that is the case?
It's pretty much the case. Pretty much the case.
Right.
You know, and you know, we have plans to you know, to kind of deal with that situation.
Before we get on to what those plans are, I think like to give yourself credit, Tony, I think what Total Rock does have going in for it is yourself. I mean, let's face it, some of the stories you've told us today about, you know, bumping shoulders with, you know, Paul McCartney, with Phil Lynott, and, you know, Moody Blues, Led Zeppelin and stuff. Like, although there might be lots of like internet stations, radio stations, what most of them don't have are the credentials that Total Rock Radio have, because of your past working, you know, for the BBC for over 25 years, because of the fact that, as I said, you were bumping shoulders with some of the world's biggest artists of all time. Like, the average person that just wants to set up a radio station is not going to have those credentials, which is, I think that's one of the reasons why I feel very honoured to have, you know, my rock and metal show on Total Rock is because it has that connection almost to like a history and lineage of music, which 99% of other radio stations, if not more than 99% of other radio stations, don't have. So I think, definitely don't sell yourself short in that regard, Tony,
Well, that's very kind of you to say so, Calum.
No, it's true.
Well, no, but in spite of that, not in spite of that. Actually, something that you sparked a thought in my mind while you were saying that was that one thing I think where people make a mistake. There are an awful lot of people out there on the internet I won't say not trying to be Tommy Vance, but trying to recreate the Friday Rock Show, if you like, and what a number of them don't realise is that the Friday Rock Show was a very contemporary music. It was playing new music all the time. It played bits of classic Zeppelin and Floyd and whatever, but it was essentially a new music show, and an awful lot of people think that they recreate the Friday Rock Show by playing the music that the Friday Rock Show played.
I see what you're saying.
Which is a big mistake.
So you think like the way forward is to constantly be playing like new artists, up and coming artists?
It is. It's what we were doing then,
right.
And it's always been,
I guess from a common sense point of view, and obviously I've spoken. Yeah.
Go on.
Go on, Tony. No, go on. I'll let you finish, and then
I had finished.
Oh, okay. No, I've spoken to many people about it before, but I guess from a very common sense point of view, up and coming artists are going to appreciate the opportunity to be played on the radio far more than the Metallicas of the world. It sounds like an obvious thing to say, but it's just true, isn't it? Like, if you play an up and coming artist that hasn't really made any money for their music and stuff, the fact that like a radio DJ, almost regardless of what station they play for, is going to reach out to them and say, I think your music's really good, I'm going to give you airtime, then they are going to really appreciate that. They're going to spread the word. It's almost just like a natural, like I scratch your back, you scratch mine sort of relationship, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're going to spread the word. If you do that, it's all you do that with enough artists, and then they're spreading that with their network and other bands that they play with and their followers and fans and stuff. Then it's going to get you out there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you were saying this might be top secret Total Rock information, but when you said that you had like sort of plans in place to sort of like I don't know, almost like revolutionise, that might be a strong word, keep up with the times, I guess, some plans in place, like are those anything that you can sort of share with us, or is that top secret right now?
I can't really share. What I can say is that it doesn't affect Total Rock. Total Rock will continue to be what it is.
Okay. Oh, okay, but you're thinking of starting up something else maybe on the side that's linked still under the Total Rock banner, but not radio or something like that?
My lips are sealed.
Yes.
My lips are sealed.
Sure, Tony.
But,
what's it like?
But hopefully for not too long.
Right, okay. What's it? One thing that I think must be amazing, and I think is definitely one of the perks of the jobs of working on the radio, is obviously having all the presence at like big festivals and gigs and that. Obviously, as I said, Total Rock is a very respected station, very, very well respected station, and I know is always sort of like welcome at big festivals and stuff. Like, what's it like for you to just be able to just go to all these like festivals every single year and just to this day and sort of like have that presence there? What's that like for you?
Well, of course it's great, but it's not the same as it. I mean, if you go back, 15 years or so, I might be able to sort of contemplate taking, 6 or 8 or 10 people, taking a team of people to download or to somewhere. Those days are long gone.
Really? For what reason?
For the reasons we've been talking about the the kind of explosion of media outlets and that sort of thing.
You just can't get that many passes.
Absolutely,
there's too much competition.
Absolutely, too much competition. Right. But in the last year or two, it's even changed. And this also has to do with what we've just been talking about another entity. It's getting increasingly difficult to talk to some artists because they feel that their time is better spent, more usefully spent with influencers and kind of other types of online outlet that aren't traditional radio or radio.
So you're talking almost like big YouTube stars and stuff rather than radio hosts, DJs.
So in other words, it's one's kind of history and all that sort of thing is all very well, but you've got to prove your kind of viability, your kind of usefulness, if you want to look at it that way, in terms of today, not in terms of what happened 40 years ago.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, no, of course.
So it's. I mean, I love going to all these, to all the festivals. And not infrequently, I camp at 1 or 2 a year. So But no, things are getting harder, and and that's again why we've been thinking about how to approach things,
branching out. Sure. How would you think has Total Rock Radio changed much over the sort of the 25 years it's sort of been around? How in your eyes has it sort of changed? How would you, if you could compare it now to how it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, how do you think it's differed, or would you not really think it has?
To be honest, not. No, I don't think it has. No, actually.
Okay. How many I know that you've got a lot of presenters. Would you say you have just as many presenters now as you've ever had, or?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, we've managed to. I don't know the exact number. Between 30 and 40.
Yeah, sure.
And it's always been roughly that. And no, I don't think it's changed either. Everyone is on the station because they love imparting their their excitement about music to other people and kind of exposing new artists and or just giving people the joy the joy of the music that they get out of it. That's
100%. And I think one thing, regardless of times changing, and we were saying that radio might not be as effective as it used to be because everything's on demand and people have all these have access to lots of things they didn't have in the past. Let's face it, back in the day, if you wanted to listen to new rock music, you'd have to listen to a rock radio show. That was the only option, other than going to gigs. But I mean, there's only so many gigs you can go to, isn't there? But one thing I do think that radio has going to it to this day is if you are, say, into rock music, into any genre, and you want to find some really good new music or some good artists, where better to go than find, say, a dedicated rock station, or as I said, or whatever genre you're into, find a dedicated station for that genre of music and listen to all of these radio DJs that are genuinely passionate about the same genre of music that you are, but maybe spend a lot more time looking for these new artists and looking for all of these cult classic artists and stuff. They might even be an old artist, but one that never even made it, for one reason or another. And then you can listen to that. Those radio DJs are doing the work for you, and then you could find your new favourite band by listening to that. That's one thing I think to this day that radio still has going for it.
Yeah, well, I think it does, but I think actually it's not so much, finding a station as finding a person that you trust. That this person who's who's likes and dislikes kind of you can understand and match your own. So I think that's the power. Is you as a DJ, to be able to gather people around you. But the thing, the thing still remains as to whether people want to do. I mean, I suppose the answer to that is that obviously increasingly people use on demand functionality for to listen when they want to, and that and people are doing that.
Yeah, sure. Do you want to just to sort of finish up, Tony? I've got some sort of like quick fire questions I've got for you. Be interested, I think it's interesting for everybody listening as well, just to find out some little bits and bobs about you. So who would you say are your favourite artists of all time? Regardless of genre, if you could say. Doesn't have to be in order or anything like that, because I know that's just too hard, but
I always find, I always say I don't have any favourite artists, to be honest, because I've spent my whole life, not so much now, but for decades, just absorbing kind of waves of incoming music, listening. I don't, to be honest, I don't sit down and listen to music at home. I might do a little bit more so now, if I can find some spare time. But in all my kind of working life, they are definitely not, because partly because being a radio producer, but being a music producer, and listening to music is not relaxing, because you're kind of analysing it all the time. You're thinking about it,
Right. Right.
And so, I'm not a big fan. I'm a huge fan of a million people, but I'm not particularly a big fan of any one.
Really?
Artist or
that sounds like crazy to me in a way. So there's like literally, if I just say to you like there's no one that comes to your mind at all, like some standouts that you would think, well, this person really stands out from all the decades. Not one.
No, because there are so many. There are so many that I've have kind of I've taken on, taken in. No, I wouldn't. No.
Fair play. What if I word it in a different way then? What if I say, what are the bands that you've listened to, say, in the last couple of years that have stood out to you? If there have been any, or bands that have really impressed you, anything like that?
Recent bands. Oh God.
Or any band. Have you ever just been standing there, whether it's been live or you just first listened to a track and you just thought, wow, and it's just that sort of hit me like.
Well, I could answer that actually. It goes back a really long way. That would be Status Quo playing at Wembley. way back in the 70s, 1970s.
Sure.
Who else? Yeah, I mean, lots of wows like that, of course. Zeppelin, AC/DC at the Marquee before they were. Genesis at Nebworth, Stones. I mean, but it's just.
Were you at Nebworth?
The big names. Which Nebworth? Which Nebworth?
The original one. Was it with the one where like Lynyrd Skynyrd co-headlined and then Rolling Stones finished last? Were you at that one?
Yeah.
You were at that one. That's that even in itself, Tony. That's like crazy to me because that's just like such a legendary festival, isn't it? Apparently, Lynyrd Skynyrd like absolutely stole the show that day. So I hear.
They were fantastic. Well, there were Nebworth. There were quite a lot of shows at one time at Nebworth. Genesis headlined one. Deep Purple. Yeah.
What's the sort of the heavier end of things that you're interested in listening to? I mean, I know there's you said that you don't really like listening to anything in a way, but in terms of like at home in your social life, which is probably hilarious for people like hearing Tony Wilson say that. But what would you say is on like the heavier end of things,
job,
like
mate.
Whether it's bands you've seen live? No, of course, yeah. Sure.
I was at. I love a lot of the kind of, tech, kind of proggy tech, kind of post music. That I was at Radar Festival in Manchester last year, and I loved all the kind of Loathe and all the Igor, all that sort of.
Go into your proggy stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of prog as well.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of original prog. I mean, in the sense of Genesis, yes, and that sort of thing. Massive
Rush,
yes fan.
Rush,
Rush, yeah, Rush, yeah. But also kind of modern prog. There's kind of tech math prog. Love that too. So perhaps in a way, prog might be one of my favourite genres.
Sure. There's some fantastic like prog metal bands around nowadays.
Yeah. Prog in all its forms.
Absolutely fantastic. Even bands like even like really well-known bands like Mastodon and stuff like that, just like so good. Some Opeth, like especially like the more modern Opeth stuff has gone more proggy rather than more like rather than how heavy they used to be. But I think it's so good.
Yeah.
Have you sort of any hobbies outside of work and music, Tony? Any sort of like random hobbies that you think that people would find interesting?
No.
No?
No.
Does music consume your life?
Music, computing, coding, DIY of all sorts. I'm a kind of jack of all trades. I've always been mechanical, fixing stuff.
Okay.
Fix anything.
Have you got a favourite movie?
I don't know, these sort of things
or movies
date you a lot, don't they? I've hardly been to the cinema in the last 20 years, and I don't have Netflix or anything like that. I don't.
You don't have any of those sort of streaming platforms?
No, I don't.
So what do you do at home in the evenings?
I work.
Right, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough.
I get up, have some breakfast, go out for a walk, and work or go to a gig, perhaps.
Brilliant. That's a good life.
Yeah. And I like, I'm happy to watch a movie if I go visit some friends or whatever. But no, I mean, I have to. It's almost true to say that I don't switch my TV on. There were several.
Really?
There were several years.
So a bit.
There's twice a year I might put the TV on, and that would be for Eurovision because it's unmissable.
Right.
And I don't know, maybe a bit of watch a bit of Wimbledon or something like that. But
Okay.
weeks can go by that I don't go into the living room and switch on my telly.
So a bit like with like music, there's not like a bit like what with you saying. There's no particular artist you could say. There's no particular like movies, like films or anything that could stand out that you've watched over the years that really.
No, I mean there's some TV comedy. I like lots of the old TV comedies, but I don't. But
which ones?
Occasionally, the only reason I mention that, I suppose, is that bits come up on Facebook or whatever, and you think,
sure,
that was funny.
Any particular sort of shows, like, because there's been Britain's like produced so many great comedy shows over the years, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I loved watching all of Rick Mail stuff when I was growing up.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Rick Mail was just a legend, in my opinion.
Sure.
Yeah. So none in particular. What about your favourite food, Tony? What's your favourite thing to eat?
I'm tempted to say curries, but Indian food, but on the other hand, I love everything else. I love fish. I
was thinking it's one of life's true joys, isn't it? Food.
It is, absolutely.
One of life's true joys, yeah.
Yeah. But just actually, I mean, one of the reasons why I'm perhaps not answering many of your questions is that I like I like variety. I like, I don't like a lot of one thing. I like, things, different things all the time. I get bored.
Sure.
I get bored with one thing.
Sure. So we've got several ex-wives, Tony.
Yeah. I know. I was thinking about that.
Right, fair enough. I mean, I think that's completely fair enough. Variety is the spice of life.
Indeed.
Variety is the spice of life, Tony, as they say.
Absolutely. I mean, for example, it's just one of those silly things. I don't even know why I thought about it. But when you open up your laptop and Microsoft's there and it says, "Do you like this picture?" on its, in the kind of backdrop. Right. When you,
sure, I understand, when you put your password in,
I have never ever said I like a picture because I don't want them fuckers thinking, oh, he likes this sort of thing. I want variety. No, just keep sending me something new.
You want to be surprised every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Absolutely.
I think that's so you're one of those people that if you go to a restaurant, you'll order like a different thing every time.
Yeah, in theory, yeah.
So you're naturally an adventurous human being by the sounds of things.
Maybe.
Well, to be fair, I think you'd have to be the fact that back when I guess it was still like a taboo genre, the fact that you gravitated so much towards things like rock and metal. Back when they first came out, like a lot of people were taken aback by it, weren't they? Whereas straight away you were hopping on the train. So I think I'm getting this image the more I'm talking to you, whether it's like the fact that you don't want to almost like commit to saying these are my favourite artists, or this is my favourite food, or this is my favourite movie, or or the fact that you were obviously very adventurous, with the music you listened to coming out at the time. That was very revolutionary. You've obviously got a naturally adventurous and sort of open-minded sort of way of life, like natural philosophy.
Maybe so.
Is there anything else you'd like to say or share at all, Tony, before we wrap up?
I guess only that you know, I feel truly blessed, you know, having been able to spend, you know, my entire working life, you know, pursuing music and finding ways, you know, of, you know, bringing kind of my, you know, joy and love of music, sharing it with other people, which has been my life, and long may it continue.
Yeah, for sure, Tony. I second that. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Tony. It's been an absolute honour and privilege to have like a real living legend of the music scene, you know, coming on the show. And like, you know, you are, mate. You know, as I said, some of those stories, like to someone like me, you know, I was born in January of 1990. You know, so to obviously to 18-year-olds, I'm not exactly like a whippersnapper, but still, you know, I, as a massive music fan, I hear about, you know, what the amount of music documentaries I've watched talking about what it was like when Sabbath came out, talking about Nebworth when Lynyrd Skynyrd stole the show, hearing about, you know, I mean, Phil Lynott, you know, died. It might have even, I mean, what year did Phil Lynott die? It might have even been before I was born. I don't know, but you know, hearing about, you know, some of my favourite bands, and you were bumping shoulders with these people. It's just amazing. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on the show, Tony. I really appreciate it, and thanks for sharing your time with us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Calum. Bye.
Cheers, Tony. This has been Pandora's Box.